Rain presses on Westminster like a hand. The river runs the colour of pewter, and smoke clings to the low arches. In the great hall, the rushes are fresh and the candles spit. Courtiers wait with the patience of men who have practiced waiting. The king sits upright beneath a blue canopy. His hands rest on the arms of the chair. His eyes are open and fixed on nothing a living man can see. A clerk kneels with a petition and does not dare to touch the step. The words catch in his throat. He swallows them and backs away. A soft chair is brought. No one moves to lift him. 2 gentlemen at arms take the weight of the chair and slide it forward a little so the king does not jar. A physician peers as far as respect allows. He looks for a tremor and for the rise of breath. He finds breath and no answer. He whispers of black bile and weary spirits and asks for warm wine with honey. The cup waits untouched. The hall measures a slow hour by the fall of tallow and the hiss of wicks. Outside, the abbey bells complain at the rain, and the city measures the sound. Women at the conduits trade the tale in low voices. The king is awake and not awake. He sits and does not know who sits. In the queen's chamber, the household tightens like a fist. Curtains are drawn. The cradle is moved. Messengers walk fast without seeming to run. A notary places the great seal on a cushion and looks to the queen for a nod. She does not call it rule. She calls it keeping the day from breaking. The silence becomes a kind of weather that seeps through stone. Masters dismiss clerks early. Priests add a psalm to the evening office. The kitchens send broth to the royal rooms and no roast. In the lists of the exchequer, a small hand writes no audience and draws a neat line. Markets empty a little before dusk. The river takes more boats than usual because men prefer moving water to a still square when news feels thin. At sunset, the hall is cleared. The king does not speak. He watches the light die as if the light belonged to someone else. Guards set a screen around the chair and keep a slow watch. The realm leans closer and listens to a breath that gives no answers. He began his reign as a cradle wrapped in silk and a seal pressed into hot wax. His father, Henry V, left the world with armor still smelling of salt and iron, and in his place came an infant too small to grip the scepter he had inherited. England had won fields in France with blood and banners, yet now it bowed to a child who could not walk. Regents stepped forward, uncles with sharp hands and clerks with long memories, and swore to keep the throne safe until the boy could stand. The crown glittered heavy above a head that had not yet grown enough to bear it. They set the boy on little thrones carved like toys. Tutors placed books before him, priests guided his lips through psalms, heralds unfurled banners and taught him the names of towns that bent to his blood. He learned to bow, to cross himself, to listen more than to speak. He smiled easily, and courtiers whispered that piety sat more firmly on his shoulders than ambition. Even as a child, Henry loved quiet more than command, prayer more than swordplay. He grew taller and kept that stillness. The double crown, England and France, was raised over him in solemn halls. In Westminster Abbey, he was anointed, while still so small that he seemed lost in the folds of cloth of gold. In Paris, years later, he was crowned again, trumpets shattering the air, banners snapping against the winter sky. Latin charters promised unity. But French voices muttered in taverns that this was not their king, only a foreign boy forced into robes too large. The ceremony glowed. Beneath it, cracks were already spreading. Regents quarreled while the king learned his letters. Gloucester loved blunt strength and ceremony. Beaufort preferred patience and the slow pull of coin. Bedford fought to hold France, counting every chest of silver and every weary archer. Henry watched with wide eyes and took lessons in silence. He came to believe that gentleness could govern better than rage. He gave alms to the poor, founded schools for young clerics, asked for peace when councils sharpened their tongues. Nobles called him saintly when they wished to hide their doubts. The years turned. He grew to manhood mild and unready. Captains wanted steel. He offered prayer. Ministers wanted swift justice. He spoke of mercy. For a time the kingdom bent, grateful to be spared the whip of war. But soldiers muttered that France was slipping, towns lost, banners lowered, and their king only bowed his head and prayed harder. His softness calmed some hearts and troubled others. There were small shadows even in these calm days. At times he would stare through a page as if through a pane of glass, lips moving in silence. Once he lost his place in a psalm, faltered and flushed with shame that lasted the day. Courtiers dismissed it as weariness, but those close to him remembered. These were tiny cracks, too faint to frighten, yet the household began to step softly around them. So his youth was written in thin ink: piety, mercy, quiet hopes. A king who longed for peace while the kingdom sharpened swords. A ruler who loved silence, even as silence was preparing to consume him whole. The weather of his mind had not yet broken, but the air was heavy, and all of England was already walking under the first shadow of the storm. Summer bleeds into autumn, and the messengers ride hard from the south. The flags that once came home, bright now travel folded. Castellon is spoken in a flat voice. Talbot lies where the grapevines drink. Bordeaux will not hold. The road up from the coast smells of mud and smoke and the fear that follows defeat. At Westminster, the doors close gently, and no one says why in the open. The king sits in a high chair and looks through air that seems to thicken between his eyes and the world. Physicians come with leeches and cups and the kind words that belong to their craft. They draw a little blood and advise rest. Priests carry relics and psalms and the slow certainty of habit. The court changes the rushes and lowers the lamps and speaks as if sound itself might bruise a patient. The king watches a corner of the ceiling. He neither sleeps nor wakes as other men do. When a servant carries a dish, he follows the dish with his eyes and forgets it before it reaches the table. In October, the queen labors and a prince arrives in a chamber, heavy with steam and whispers. The child is lifted like a small sun. The city waits for joy to break across the palace like morning after a storm. She brings the infant to the chair. The king does not turn his head. He does not ask a name. He does not bless. A wet nurse steps back with the child held close and does not let the tears reach her mouth. The cradle in the royal rooms gains a weight the court can feel in the stone. Weeks pass, and the calendar writes its squares in a hand that looks tired. The council gathers without the king and learns to finish sentences that would once have waited for his nod. Gloucester is dead. Somerset carries blame like a brand. York stands outside the circle and counts his friends with care. The London guilds listen. The shires listen. Men who hated each other last winter sit at the same table and agree that a realm cannot bow to a chair forever. A winter of silence becomes a spring of papers. The seal moves to a green velvet cushion in a smaller room. The queen fights to keep the circle close to her hand. York demands a straighter line. The lords choose a word that hurts less than usurp. Protector. It covers a wound without healing it. The king breathes in his chair and answers no one. Outside the abbey, a cart breaks a wheel, and men laugh because they can fix wood with wood. Inside, nothing answers to tools. The stillness of one body has begun to pull the country into a slow turn. The silence that held the court for more than a year begins to thin. One morning in a dark chamber, the king blinks, lifts his head and whispers for a psalm. The priest nearly drops the book in shock. Servants rush but move as if stepping on ice. Henry VI breathes and speaks in a low voice, asking what month it is, how long God has tested him, and why his wife stands before him pale with tears. He eats a little bread and asks to see his son, the boy born during his long absence of mind. The Queen brings the infant closer, and for the first time the king smiles, though faintly. The hall exhales after a year of holding its breath. The news spreads like fire. Bells ring in London. People kneel in the streets to give thanks. Courtiers dress in brighter cloth, hoping the light will last. The council seizes this miracle, charters signed in the king's name, seals pressed before witnesses. Somerset is restored to power, walking proudly again after being blamed for France. York is pushed aside with polite words. His role as protector ended now that the king is himself again. Margaret the Queen stands taller. She has borne the heir, and now her husband is returned. For a few weeks, England pretends that nothing has broken, but memory lingers. Noble houses sharpen their rivalries. York does not forgive his exile from the council, nor the Queen her hunger for allies who will serve her son above all. In halls and manors, men count which side they belong to. Retainers are summoned quietly. Letters sealed with private crests ride north and west. The court glitters in ceremony, while in taverns men whisper of feud. Then the tension bursts at St. Albans. It is May 1455, when York and Warwick bring armed men through the narrow streets of the market town. The royal banner rises against them, but the lanes are too tight, the archers too many. Arrows snap through gardens, men fall among stalls and shutters. Somerset is struck down in the press of bodies, hated by Yorkists as the ruin of France. The king himself is found with a cut to his neck, dazed but calm, taken into custody by cousins who bow while holding him captive. Parliament is called and writes that York fought not against his sovereign, but against evil counsellors. It is a dangerous fiction, yet it soothes for a moment. Warwick learns how strong applause feels when backed by steel. Margaret sees the danger more clearly than anyone. Her husband is now a prize to be carried from camp to camp. The boy, Prince, becomes the banner she raises to fight for the future. The miracle of recovery has saved the king's life, but not his realm. His voice has returned, but his hands are bound by factions. From now on, England will not walk as one kingdom. It will split into camps that claim to serve the crown, yet serve only themselves. The silence of the king has ended, but the noise of civil war has begun. London wakes to pageant and caution. Cheapside is swept, windows hung with cloth, altars dressed for a long procession that will be called Love Day. The king orders badges put away and knives kept sheathed. He means to sew a country back together with his own hands. From Westminster to St. Paul's he walks in blue velvet, pale but steady, the relic of St. Edward carried before him. On his right the Queen. On his left the Duke of York. Behind them, Salisbury and Somerset, Warwick and Northumberland, enemies paired like unwilling dancers. Bells roll. Guilds hold their banners low so the points do not look like spears. Apprentices keep to the edges with cudgels wrapped in cloth so wood will not gleam like intent. The gesture works for an hour. Henry prays at the shrine, pays for masses, promises to forgive. A proclamation forbids livery coats and private armies in the streets. Meat is sent to prisons, alms to paupers. London breathes, and for a day pretends that a crown can pour oil on iron and make it shine. The Queen smiles with the small muscle that means duty. York bows with the small angle that means calculation. Warwick keeps his gaze on the stones, as if they could tell him how many men in the city would follow his badge if badges were still allowed. When the candles are cold, the work begins again in private rooms. Margaret writes north and west, to Clifford and to the Percy lords, to Devon, to the young Somerset, who wears his father's anger like a borrowed sword. Come for the honour of the prince. York writes to March and Salisbury, to captains with noses for wind, keep men ready. Guildmasters balance their ledgers and choose which cousin to offend. The king asks for processions on Fridays and for new rules on liveries, and by this he believes he is building a fence that tempers will not cross. At night the city hears pack horses leave by quiet gates. In autumn the court sets itself at Coventry. The summons sounds like council and smells like trap. York and his friends gather at Ludlow under the banner of the White Rose and look across the Thames toward a royal host thicker than hedges. With the king ride bishops and lawyers who can turn a field into a judgment. With the queen ride northern men who remember blood more clearly than charters. Between the two camps stands a captain with a soldier's nose for odds. Andrew Trollope has served long in France and does not like the taste of civil war. He looks up at the royal standard and shakes his head. He will not fight against a banner he has guarded half his life. He and the Calais veterans change sides in the night and leave a hole where courage had stood. Dawn shows the scale of it. The royal army holds the ridges. Trumpets answer trumpets. York's line, phrase, then folds without a charge. Men drop pikes and look to the west. The Duke rides for the coast and a hard sea toward Ireland. Warwick and March cut for the south and a ship to Calais. The king is led into Ludlow by a road lined with silent faces. Soldiers plunder in the name of order and call it the king's peace. A child cries in a gutted shop. The court writes that rebellion is ended. The truth is leaner. A procession could not cure a fracture. It only taught both sides how long a country can pretend before it breaks again. Calais teaches Warwick a new kind of war. Guns sleep under salt, sailors learn the tide, and messages move faster than writs. From the pale walls he turns the strait into a road. In spring his men strike Sandwich before dawn, seize royal ships, and land in Kent with drums wrapped in cloth, so the sound carries like a rumour. London weighs danger against hunger for order and opens its gates. Bells greet the White Rose. Merchants smile because armies that pay their bills are rare. The king is inland with councillors who promise safety in numbers and law. Warwick and the young Earl of March march north by the straightest lanes. Men join them because pay is regular and commands are clean. The hosts meet in rain at Northampton, the royal camp hedged with carts and guns facing the field. The sky turns the earth to clay. Powder sulks in damp barrels. Orders go down the line in voices worn by cold. The first charge breaks on stakes. The second finds a gap where a friend turns coat. Grey of Ruthin asks for quarter and gives passage instead. Yorkist bills press through the hedge. The king's guns spit once and die. Canvas tears. Standards slip in the mud and are lifted by different hands. Rain writes short lines on steel. In the centre a tent sags, and the men inside look at one another and at the cords that hold the canvas up as if cords were law. Henry is found seated, wet at the hem, calm like a man who has waited out many storms. He does not rave. He does not command. He folds into custody with the mildness that has always unmade him. Captors bow and call him sovereign while they take the seal and the day. He rides to London between cousins who shout of rescue and reform in the same breath. Crowds cheer because cheer feels safer than doubt. Parliament gathers under heavy air. Bad counsel is blamed as always. Petitions speak of the common weal and the need to set the realm on a straight road. York returns from Ireland with a slower step and a harder gaze. He enters the hall and lays his hand on the empty throne as if testing a door. The room forgets to breathe. Outside the walls, messages run north. The Queen is not finished. She will raise a storm in winter. The king is present and absent at once, a soft centre around which sharper wills begin to circle. Autumn hardens. Frost climbs the abbey stones. York returns from Ireland and enters Westminster. He stops before the throne. Parchment speaks. Lords write a settlement and call it accord. The king keeps the crown for life. York is named heir in place of the child born during the year of quiet. London tells itself that paper can end steel. North of the Trent, the Queen writes another line. Clifford remembers a father cut down at St. Albans. Northumberland remembers a house broken there too. They answer her seal. Men leave cold farms and gather under standards stiff with frost. This host does not love southern law. It loves memory and the right of a son. York rides north with a low sun behind him. He brings fewer men than prudence would count and leaves Warwick to guard the captive king. At Sandal he looks down on a white field and watches snow ripple with movement that is not wind. Scouts bring numbers that grow by the hour. The wise course is patience. Pride and rumour burn like dry hedge. York leads out. Wakefield closes like a trap. Captains fold from copses. Men slip in ruts under crusted snow. Standards vanish and return torn. Salisbury is taken for the rope. York fights until breath fails. When the crush clears, he lies among broken shafts. Heads ride to York on spikes and are set above Micklegate, so travellers read the new grammar of power. A paper crown is fixed to the skull of the fallen duke. In London, Warwick keeps the king and hears the north coming like weather. The Queen's host rolls south with carts that carry fear. Villages shut doors at dusk. Markets empty before noon. The city counts its choice in the clink of shutters. South in the marches, a tall youth gathers levies. At dawn, 3 suns hang in a pale sky, cold and bright. He is Edward, son of York. News of Wakefield hardens his jaw. 2 storms move toward London. Between them sits the gentle king, a prize too soft to save himself. Winter will decide who wears the crown and who carries it. Dawn at Mortimer Cross comes with a cold trick of light. 3 suns hang in a pale sky and bleed into one as frost lifts. Men cross themselves. Edward reads the sign as armour rather than omen, and tells his levies they will stand as one bright circle against the winter. The wind bites. Arrows hiss. Bills meet in a grinding of teeth. By noon the field belongs to March and to Warwick's School of Order, not to Jasper Tudor. Prisoners are counted. News rides hard toward London that a young captain has beaten the West and is marching fast. At the same hour, another wheel turns near St. Albans. Warwick has planted carts and guns to block the northern host. Powder sulks in damp. Lanes wind between hedges that know every trick of ambush. Clifford and Somerset push through gardens and along churchyards. The Yorkist line buckles where friends are few. The king sits quiet behind the fight with a paper crown's serenity. When the push breaks Warwick's hedge, he slips away, while the Queen's men find Henry by a tree and lead him off like a saint from a painting, gentle and unhelpful and loved by those who need a banner. What follows is fear in motion. Toward London rolls a host with winter hunger in its belly and cold fury in its hands. Villages tighten shutters, tales run ahead of truth. Shops are stripped on the road. Mothers hide bread. London counts wagons and decides that safety is the first law. The city shuts its gates on a king who cannot command his own guard, and on captains who call revenge justice. Margaret feels the wall as a verdict and turns aside toward Dunstable and the north. Edward comes in by the river with men who pay and keep ranks. Bells answer, not for love but for order. The council meets and finds that a realm prefers a voice to a relic. York's son takes oaths as protector, because the word still soothes ink. Outside, men whisper a shorter word that fits him better. The crown is not yet on his head, and already the weather of England is changing. Edward spends spring mending walls shaken by war. Writs go out with clean edges. Sheriffs swear and are kept to their oaths. Warwick keeps roads straight and ports watchful. Merchants find coin again, and barges crowd the wharf. The bells sound less afraid. Night patrols thin. For a moment, the kingdom moves as if a bad dream had released its grip. North of the line, Henry lives as rumour more than king. Scotland lends a roof and a chapel. Margaret bargains in cold, rooms where candles gutter. She promises futures she does not own. Help from France and border lords comes and goes like weather. Coastal castles open by oath 1 week and by hunger the next. Winter bites garrisons. Summer brings sails that scatter when Warwick's riders appear. The north still snaps at the hand that feeds it. Lines meet at Hedgeley Moor. At Hexham the Yorkist net closes, and captains of the Red rose kneel to a short law. Henry is not there. He walks under trees, with 2 friars and a servant who can read the sky. He sleeps in granges and in halls that dare a night of loyalty. He leaves before cockcrow and thanks God for the door that did not betray him. The capture is small after so much thunder. A door opens on a quiet afternoon in a house near the fells. Someone has written a letter for coin. Men enter with the calm soldiers, save for churches. The king tries the back stair and the bracken, and is taken by a stream while his shoes fill with peat water. He folds his hands and returns to London by stages that feel like a dream he had as a child. The Tower receives him as it receives weather. A chamber with a narrow light, mass by the hour. A scribe notes meat taken and psalm said, and no more. Visitors come by license and leave with dry eyes and wet palms. Sometimes he speaks of mercy. More often, he listens to wind in the slit and to his own breath. England outside learns ordinary days again. Inside thick walls, the old king keeps the only craft he never lost. He endures without a word. Peace hardens into habit and then into grievance. Edward pays his soldiers and laughs in halls that remember fear. Warwick keeps the roads clean and feels the credit drift to another name. Then the king brings home a bride from a quiet manor, and not from a royal court. Elizabeth Woodville kneels at Grafton and rises a queen. Her kin fill chambers and offices like bright ivy on new stone. Warwick had promised France a royal match and must eat the letter. He bows in public and sharpens in private. Clarence, Edward's brother, thinks of crowns when he should think of oaths. The net that held the realm now pulls against itself. In the north, tax officers meet men with bills and hard memories. A rising flares and dies and flares again. Edgecote breaks under summer thunder. Captains of the White Rose are taken and bled dry. For a breath, Warwick holds the king and finds that a captive sovereign is a stone that will not fit any wall he builds. London will not be ruled by a subject who cannot say the word mercy. The king is freed. Smiles return without trust beneath them. The breach becomes exile. Warwick and Clarence run for Calais and find its guns slow to salute a lord, suddenly out of favour. The sea gives them France instead. In Angers, the Spider King folds 2 hatreds into one plan. Warwick will bring back the gentle king. Margaret will forgive the maker of her grief if he kneels to her son. The pledge is sealed, with hands that tremble from pride and hunger both. A marriage joins the houses that hated each other in the last field. Autumn blows a storm across the Channel. Montague lifts the north. Sheriffs who wore the Son of York last year now wear the cross keys of Lancaster. Edward wakes to an empty camp and a cold wind off the wash. He rides for the coast and takes ship with a handful who prefer hazard to judgment. Burgundy will fatten him and send him back when the weather suits trade. London opens its gates to a procession that looks like a memory. Henry walks out of the Tower pale and mild, a sprig of wintergreen in his hand, and is led to St. Paul's where bells try to remember the note they rang for him as a child. He sits again beneath a canopy and smiles with the calm that ruined him. Warwick rules the day by counsel. Clarence tastes power as a promise and finds it flavoured with doubt. Writs call this season the readeption, as if a lost coin had been found in rushes. For a few months, England tests the old shape. Pardons are written, attainders reversed. Men who ran to Scotland come south and touch the marble of Chancery with hands that once clawed heather. The Queen of the White Rose hides in sanctuary and bears a son, while London keeps a nervous peace. The gentle king speaks little, prays often, and signs what is set before him. The realm moves again by other wills around the same soft centre. Along the coast watchers count sails. Burgundy sharpens its sums. Edward gathers merchants and archers and a courage that grows in exile. Winter will crack. A flag will rise on the Humber. The wheel has turned once more and set the quiet man on the chair. It has not learned how to stop. Spring opens the road again. Burgundy has weighed profit and decides Edward is worth a gamble. Ships leave from Flushing and ride a hard sea toward the Humber. The wind nearly breaks them, but fortune holds. By March, he lands with a handful of knights and banners stiff with salt. Towns hesitate, then open their gates when coin is shown and oaths are sworn. Men who had bent to Lancaster yesterday bow to the young son today. Within weeks, Edward's small force has grown into an army that smells of wet wool and hope. London waits and listens. Warwick holds Henry like a charm against doubt, but the city remembers tall bills and paid ranks more than old prayers. Edward moves quick, riding in through Bishopsgate almost unopposed. Crowds gather, and the cry for the White Rose drowns out hesitation. The Queen leaves sanctuary with her child. The streets smell of rosemary and damp stone as Edward is crowned again in St. Paul's by hands that never wanted to let him go. Henry, mild as ever, returns to the Tower without protest, a king in name only, set aside by the will of speed. The North answers in steel. Margaret brings her son across the Channel, raising men with the memory of wrongs. Somerset, Exeter, Devon muster what remains. The hosts meet by the Avon at Tewkesbury. The field is long and uneven, hedges thick, ground hard with early sun. Edward arrays his men clean, March and Gloucester at his sides, artillery well placed. The clash begins with arrows and ends with press of bills. Somerset charges too soon and is trapped in a lane where Warwick's veterans hold firm. Panic folds the Lancastrian flank. Men scatter into fields where horsemen ride them down. The Prince of Lancaster, 17 and full of promise, is caught. Accounts differ struck in battle, cut down after capture, or slain before Edward himself. What matters is the end. Margaret sees her son's body and falls silent, broken at last. Within days she is a prisoner. Somerset and other captains lose their heads in tidy executions. The House of Lancaster is shattered in one afternoon of sun and steel. Edward returns to London in triumph. Processions blaze, bells thunder. He walks in Westminster with his brothers, tall and certain. Henry remains in the Tower, a pale figure forgotten by the crowd. Parliament writes that the war is ended, that God has judged. For a season the realm breathes as if wounds could truly heal. But in the quiet chamber by the river, a gentle king still waits, a shadow whose mere presence keeps alive the fear that storms can return. The victory at Tewkesbury closes one book, but another waits in the Tower. Henry VI sits in his narrow chamber with the Thames whispering below. He is pale, worn thin, a figure more shadow than king. Guards mark the hours with slow steps. Priests bring psalms. The court outside hardly remembers him, except as a risk, a spark that could reignite a fire smothered with blood. Edward IV rides in triumph through London, but he knows a crown rests less on gold than on silence. While Henry lives, the red rose still has a root. In May, the city dresses for the king's return. Bells roll, torches crackle, crowds cheer the son of York. Margaret, broken, is shown as prisoner, her son gone, her cause ended. But in corners of taverns, men still whisper of mercy, of a rightful king who waits behind walls. Edward hears and does not forgive. He walks in Westminster, tall with his brothers beside him, and promises a peace that will last a generation. Yet peace has no room for a rival with royal blood. The night of May 21st is written in careful phrases. Some say Henry died of grief. Some say God called him. Others record a blow, quiet and efficient, perhaps at the order of Gloucester, perhaps at the wordless consent of the new king. The body is shown in St. Paul's to prove the tale of natural death, but Londoners see a face marked by more than prayer. Rumour moves faster than ceremony. They call it murder in the shadow of the crown. He is buried at Chertsey, among monks who chant through smoke and candle wax. Later, his bones will be moved to Windsor, laid near saints so that memory might soften into legend. Pilgrims come, touching the stone, whispering that Henry was simple, gentle, even holy, a king who suffered rather than ruled. They speak of miracles at his grave, of cures and visions. The weak man who brought civil war becomes in death a figure of pity, almost of sanctity. England breathes easier without him, yet the peace is fragile. Edward's reign rests on blood spilled in fields and chambers alike. The Wars of the Roses are not done, only paused. Still, for the first time in years, the throne holds a man who looks the part of a king. Henry, the king who could not fight, who prayed while armies broke around him, is at last silent forever. His quiet reign ends not with trumpets, but with a whisper behind locked doors. Death does not end a story. It reshapes it. Henry VI leaves behind no victories, no reforms, no shining court. What remains is silence, pity, and the long shadow of war. Chroniclers write him as simple, meek, unfit for rule. Others polish him into a saintly figure, a king who suffered like Job while cousins tore the kingdom apart. Pilgrims kneel at his grave and whisper of cures. Soldiers remember him as the man who prayed while arrows hissed. Queens and dukes remember him as the void around which their own power rose and fell. For Edward IV, Henry's end is a closing of a dangerous chapter. The White Rose reigns without rival. Yet the memory of the quiet king lingers, used by enemies as banner and by friends as caution. To nobles, his reign is proof that gentleness without strength breaks kingdoms. To common folk, it is proof that kings can bleed their land by doing nothing as surely as by leading wars. In plays and sermons, he becomes a lesson, a man with a crown who could not command himself, much less a nation. The Wars of the Roses are not finished. Edward's bloodline will twist upon itself. Clarence and Gloucester, sons of York, turning as fiercely against each other as once against Lancaster. The house that rose on Towton Field will stumble into its own ruin. But in memory, Henry becomes the emblem of the first great turning. His name is joined with defeat in France, with the red rose scattered at Towton, with the meekness that called others to fill his silence with their steel. In time, his figure grows softer. Monks keep his story alive with tales of healing. Mothers name sons for him, believing the gentle king's spirit might guard them. Historians argue whether he was holy, mad, or simply broken by weight he never asked to carry. All agree his reign bled England into decades of feud. The man who said little left a country that could not stop shouting. So ends Henry VI, the king who prayed while cousins warred, who ruled more by absence than command, who left peace neither in life nor in death. His crown passed on, his wars endured, and his silence echoed longer than the voices of men who shouted him down. He was England's quiet king, and his quiet proved louder than any trumpet.